All right. So what I'd like to start with, I'm not going to start with three Dharma cells. What I'd like to start with is the question that I asked 2 weeks ago when we were ending the other class. I asked, how do we tell whether or not something is true? Because the Dharma seals represent in Buddhism, they represent something which is purported to be true. Right? And we actually say it's kind of ultimately true. Right? That the Dharma seals actually represent reality. Right? And usually when reality is kind of where we live, but when we approach the Dharma seals, we usually think of them philosophically. Right? We think of them as kind of like, they're just concepts. Right? So we think things are permanent, we think about non-self, and we kind of understand the concepts. We think about nirvana, we think about the concept of nirvana. But it doesn't always kind of touch reality. Right? But reality is where we live. Or at least part of us does. So when we evaluate something, how do we know that it's true? So how I'd like to start is, let's just break up into groups of like 4 or 5, just naturally clump up into small groups. You don't have to present, so you don't need a secretary. But just discuss amongst yourselves, how do you know something is true? If you have trouble getting started, I'll give you an example. Right? You can come up with an example yourself, or you can discuss generally if you like. But for example, if you see a red stove ring in your kitchen, how do you know it's hot? There we go. Okay. So, how do we know something is true or not? Someone, can you share something that you guys have discussed in your groups?
It's universal.
It's universal.
For everyone.
How do okay. How do you know if it's universal or not, though?
From experience, you see.
Okay. So there we go. I'm not talking about the characteristics of what's true. I'm asking, how do you know whether or not something is true? To kind of illustrate it, I've got this little. You guys have seen Venn diagrams before, right? Set theory. This is a math class as well. It's called a Venn diagram. So, or maybe a Euler diagram. I'm not sure which. Never told the difference. Anyway, you have a set of everything that's true. Right? So these are all the things that are actually true in reality. Then we have a set of everything that you believe. Those sets are usually not the same. Right? In the Buddha's case, it would be the same circle, we say, if you believe that. So maybe most of what we believe isn't actually true. Some of it intersects. So this section in here is what we usually call knowledge. Right? If we actually believe it and it's true. Right? So we're talking about how do you know if something is here versus here. So Barry, you said experience. So in the example of the hot stove, what would experience be? Ow! That would be experience. Okay. And one of the other characteristics is true in the past, true in the future. Was someone going to say that as well? I heard you guys when you were talking about the answers that I've given you down there about the characteristics. So to actually know if it was true or not, then you'd actually have to put your hand on the stove every time you pass by. So, how else can we tell them if something is true?
Well, sort of in the same vein as experience, what we discussed was not just knowledge, but applied knowledge and practical knowledge. Things that we don't just know, but things that we've actually experienced and dealt with in our daily lives. So we might have read in a book, yes, the stove is hot, but we've actually applied that or experienced that.
Okay. So is that different? Is that new from what Barry said, or different?
I would say some of the same vein.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or practice.
Yeah.
So these are kind of the same then, right? You said something else though, that we might have.
Well, so the same our senses, applied senses.
Okay. That's not what you said before though.
What did you say? I don't know.
You said you might have read it in a book.
Oh, yeah,
Right?
knowledge.
That's how we learn true things, right? Has anyone not learned anything out of a book? Right. So How else?
Understanding cause and effect.
So I heard something.
Now, you've been told the truth.
Been told. What did your mother say when you were approaching the stove with your hand out? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, how else?
Understanding cause and effect.
Okay, it's true. That's actually getting to something important. How do you understand cause and effect? Not quite.
If I touch the stove, my hand will get burned.
What is that? Thank you. Everyone here?
That extreme heat.
Did everyone hear what? Reasoning. Right.
Yeah.
Applying cause and effect is kind of reasoning. Or what did Sherlock Holmes do? Deduction, right? Deductive reasoning. Any others?
If you don't have memory, you'll touch it again and again because you don't remember what occurred to you before.
So
Yeah.
memory.
Long-term memory.
Excellent. It's maybe not so much how we tell something is true, but it's definitely needed in order for us to actually do that. Anything else? That's pretty good. I only came up with basically three, right? And they're all represented here, right? So you can know things through experience, right? So you perceive something, you are in a situation, you do something, you see the results. That's how you learn, right? So if you want to learn the piano, you can play the piano through experience. If you want to learn if the stove is hot or not, then you can touch it. Reasoning, right? So if I put my hand towards the stove and I feel it getting hotter, I could deduce or reason that if I actually put my hand on it, it's really going to hurt. And I can do that. I can learn that without actually experiencing putting my hand on the stove, right? And I'll believe that to be true, that I'll burn myself if I touch the stove, right? So my sensory experience, my reasoning, and then what people told me. Right? So mom said, don't touch the stove, you'll burn yourself. Maybe I have to actually do it, maybe not. If someone tells you something, who do you learn the truth from? Sorry?
From the senior and the grandparents and the parents.
Right. So your parents, your seniors, your grandparents, etc.
Teachers.
Teachers. Who else? So you can learn from anyone, right? And does that tell you if it's true or not? How about, I got an email recently from a gentleman in Nigeria. How do I, and he told me some things, how do I know if those are true?
It's too beautiful.
Too good to be true? So the source actually matters, right? If someone is telling you the source does matter, right? So we're evaluating the source. And the way that we trust that source or not is through experience, what other people have told us, and reason. Right? So it's kind of like these three things are kind of always in play, right? And which one is best, according to the Buddha?
Experience.
Experience? Which one is it? Both, okay.
Practice.
How many people think personal experience is most important for learning what the Buddha taught, for learning the Dharma? All of the above. Okay. Good. This is going to take less time than I thought. There there is it's because you guys are senior students. If I was doing this with beginners, it would be different, right? Because a lot of people, when they're initially attracted to Buddhism, they come because they hear, like, I don't have to just believe, right? There's no doctrine that I just have to accept, right? It's not like there's a priest up there telling me, you know, this is the way it is, and if you don't accept it, you're going to hell, right? I can figure it out for myself, right? So we put that kind of idea of personal responsibility first, right? Which is true, right? That statement about Buddhism is not false. That is how we learn Buddhism. And then you come to class for a few years, and then you run across something like faith. And someone's telling you, no, faith is most important. Without faith, you can't go anywhere. Right? You have faith, and then you have vows, and then you have practice. Right? And faith comes first. Before you go anywhere, you have to have faith. So what is faith? Which is actually the second question on my little here. Things are going according to plans. Right.
Faith is belief in the truth.
Belief in the truth.
Kind of those two put together.
You guys agree?
Yeah, the faith would come from all the things that we need to do in order to come up with our faith.
Right. So what we're saying then is that faith isn't just someone tells you and you believe it. Right. So faith is actually, in Buddhism at least, I think, something that is strengthened over time. Right. And the way that it's strengthened is through all these things. You read more, you learn more, you go to more teachers, right? You see whether or not what is being told to you is true or not. But there still tends to be a tendency to trust our own perceptions, our own ideas better. So a lot of people that I talk to who are newer students, right, even some of the students who've been around for a longer time, they will provide an interpretation of a Buddhist teaching. And it will be, unfortunately, incorrect. But they'll say, no, it's valid because this is the way that I see it. This is the way that I've experienced it. So therefore, this must be true. So is that person right or wrong? Can you just interpret the Buddhist teachings and they're, as long as they're helpful to you, they're okay? I see some nods and some shakes.
No.
Right? So beyond our own experience, there actually is something that is more allowable. It can be, not always. Right? But sometimes. So I want to show you a short video. It's about 8 minutes long. So just in case, because we do tend to say, you know, what we perceive, what we think is kind of most important. So those of you who actually, by mistake, the link to the video went out with the handout, can I just ask how many people actually watched it? You weren't supposed to, but if you did, it's okay.
Very good.
It was just meant for Venerable maybe to review, but it went out to everyone anyway, so that doesn't matter. If you watched it, you know what you're going to see. If not, please watch. But as this gentleman is talking, please follow. He gives his audience some instructions. I want you guys to follow along with his instructions. So he tells you to close your eyes, etc. Okay. So, what does that teach you?
Yes.
Seeing how? How do things seem?
And also we create our own reality.
Yeah. How reliable is it?
Not very reliable.
Right. So that's an example of how what we perceive is constructed. Right? How little it actually can correspond to reality because of things like attention, or as we might call it, mindfulness. Right? As mindful as we might be, we're still not catching everything that's going on around us. Right? And as we've talked about in the past, even what we see, or hear, or feel, or taste, or touch, is not, we have no guarantee that it represents reality. Right? Think about what happens when you see something. Okay, when I see you, there's light rays, they bounce off you, they hit the cells in the back of my eye. Right? So it's just light. and then they get translated somehow into chemicals, right, which feed back into the brain. And somehow those get translated into electric impulses in my synapses. And then somehow my brain does some things, whatever, and it actually creates this kind of image. Right? And that's what I'm seeing is this thing inside my brain. Right? What I call sight is whatever this chemical reaction and then electric reaction is inside my brain. Right? Has very little to do with you except that, you know, something started with you and came into my head. But what is actually out there and what's actually in here are two separate things. And then in terms of what I can actually pay attention to, so no, it's just perception, right? But what I'm actually aware of, what I'm actually conscious of, as we just saw, isn't even a portion of what's actually coming in. And this is what we rely on to achieve Buddhahood. This is when we say our experience, our personal experience is how we progress in towards Buddhahood. This is what we're relying on. So, doesn't mean that we shouldn't rely on it, because we have nothing else. But it does mean that we should be deeply, deeply suspicious. Right? The same way that I should be suspicious of something that, you know, the email that I got from my Nigerian friend. I should really do some thinking about that. I should try to verify. Right? Reagan said, trust but verify. So maybe he was a Buddhist, or maybe Buddhist was a Republican, I'm not sure which. But someone just caught that, okay? But in Buddhism, we really, the essence of what we're doing, right? And when we say, like, you know, the 3 seals have to apply to daily life, it means we always have to be undergoing this process of investigation, of testing. Right, so the quote that I had in the handout, right, so just as a goldsmith would test his gold by burning, cutting, and rubbing it, so must you examine my words and accept them, not merely out of reverence. Right, and so many people, like when this quote is first taught or people first run across it, they say, well, that just means I shouldn't just believe what the Buddha said, I should trust myself. Right? What it's actually saying, though, isn't that you should trust yourself or not trust the Buddha, it just says that you should test. Right? You should use all the tools you have, because none of these are reliable. But you need to use them all. Right? And through doing that, that's how we develop faith. Okay? So when I say that the 3 Dharma seals are true, these are the tools that we have to decide whether or not that's true. Right? And it does have to start with faith. No matter what. Because we all have faith in something. Maybe we have faith in the teachings. Maybe we only have faith in our perceptions. Right? Maybe we have faith in our reasoning ability. But we have to have faith somewhere. Otherwise we would just sit there gibbering. Right? We wouldn't be able to function. We wouldn't be able to do anything. So before we can start anything, we have to put our faith in something. Right? The mistake that a lot of us make in the beginning is that we only put our faith in one of these. Right? But all of them are unreliable, so we really have to, you know, we have faith in them, but we test them. Make sense? Okay. So with that, we've got 35 minutes to talk about the Dharma seals. No problem. Very easy. That was the hard part. Now that we know how to approach them, it's easy. So, how many people have studied the 3 Dharma seals before in another class or previously? About half or so. Okay. So for those of you, and everyone has read the book in the handout, so you've got some idea of the concepts that we're talking about. So when we talk about impermanence, so I've got a definition here of impermanence. That impermanence is the idea that every phenomenon, it arises, it abides, it declines, and it ceases. Right? And this applies to everything. Right? Impermanence has no exceptions. Right? That's why it's a Dharma seal. Right? And that's where, you know, if you read the handout about the 4 characteristics of what is actually true. Right? So it's true in the past, true in the future, it's true universally, right? And it's true without exception. Right? So if that's true, we say that about impermanence. Is that what we actually believe? Who believes that? Who believes that everything, without exception, in the past and the future, is impermanent? Okay. Do we act that way?
No.
No. So if we don't act that way, maybe we don't quite believe it. Maybe we think some things are permanent, some things aren't. Right? A lot of people who here aren't Buddhists or or come from another religious tradition, you might say, well, God is permanent. Right? You might say that our soul is permanent. Right? You might even say, if you're a Buddhist, you might say, well, nirvana is permanent. Or some people sometimes say, well, is impermanence permanent? So first of all, just so I don't confuse everyone with that, it's a stupid question. Impermanence is not a thing, right? So we're talking about phenomena, we're talking about compounded things, right? So impermanence is just a quality that all things possess, right? Saying whether it's permanent or not makes no sense. So you can leave that one aside for now. You never have to ask that one again, please. But if you want to understand, are things permanent? Let's think about it. Right? Can you think of anything that is permanent? Do you believe that maybe there are things that we can't prove whether they're permanent or not, like a soul or like God? Some people do. There's nothing wrong with that. But just because you can't prove it doesn't mean you should think about it. So let's think about impermanence. Right, and that's where we get to my next question here. If there was such a thing as a phenomenon that was permanent, what other characteristics would it have to have? I won't split up into groups for this question because it's a bit difficult, but
It would be unchanging.
it would be unchanging. What else?
Forever.
It would last forever. Okay? So it would never change, it would last forever. That implies some other things.
We've never seen anything different. Like if you're using your senses, with smell, sight,
Right. So nothing in our experience is really like that, so that's true. What else? How did it get there?
How would an independent nature then?
It would be independent. What does it mean if it has an independent nature? Jane?
It can exist alone or by itself.
It can exist alone or by itself. Actually, not just that, it has to. Right? By definition, if it's permanent, it is existing without interaction with anything else. Right? What else? If it's permanent, how did it get there?
It was always there.